So this morning, what I'd like to do is, since I'll be speaking and doing the singing here, separate the 3 points of the sermon into 3 different sections, which are broken up by songs, which is something I like to do. It gives a nice emphasis to the point being made at the point it's being made, and then gives us something to reflect on as we sing. It also helps me keep track of time in a really convenient way. So what I'd like you to do, we're going to be taking for our lesson Luke 24, and I'm going to read a pretty large portion of Luke 24. We're going to start in 13 and go all the way to 35. So Luke 24, 13 through 35. On that very day, 2 of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with one another as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since all these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see. And he said to them, 'O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken, was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?' And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, 'Stay with us, for it is toward evening and the day is now far spent.' So he went in to stay with them. And when he was at the table with them, he took bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. Then they said to each other, 'Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?' And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, 'The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon.' They told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread." So what do we have here? We have 2 disciples. We know that these 2 disciples are likely part of the larger group that would follow Jesus and had been following Jesus. Some would speculate, and I think pretty accurately, they would be counted among the 70, not the 11 that are left. At this point, Judas has betrayed Jesus and is gone. And the 11 are still in Jerusalem, as we read at the end of the passage. So they are likely part of that larger group. Of course, thousands of people followed Jesus at some point in his ministry, but he had circles within circles. Cleopas is one of them, and likely the other one is related to or somehow a friend of Cleopas. They're walking toward Emmaus, away from Jerusalem. And one thing to understand about the book of Luke is that from here, before in Luke, what he had been doing was talking about how Jesus was on the way toward Jerusalem, how his mission and his life, the culmination of everything that he came to do, happened in Jerusalem. So Luke paints the picture of Jesus' life, especially in the last week, as one is walking toward Jerusalem. And then in Acts, he will talk about how from Jerusalem the Spirit will go out. And so it is fair to say that Luke is telling us something about their walking away from Jerusalem, the pair of them. They're walking away sad, disappointed, brokenhearted. They're walking away from the main collective because it seems like what they had been doing in Jerusalem seemed to have failed. So where else are they going to go? 7 miles is a pretty long journey for someone in those days. People didn't just travel 7 miles without a reason. It is Resurrection Sunday for them, the actual Resurrection Sunday, but they are not celebrating. They are brokenhearted and disappointed. And maybe in some ways that is how we find ourselves today, some of us. Maybe we are brokenhearted. Maybe we have things that are going on, disappointments, things that we thought God would do and he hasn't, or we haven't seen him do it yet. Perhaps we have placed our hopes in things that we haven't yet seen. And yet, perhaps also our eyes, like these disciples, are just simply being kept from seeing him for one reason or another. I think that the road to Emmaus, this metaphor that I'm going to use here, is something that many Christians can talk about. This Emmaus road time when, having not seen the things that we thought we saw, having heard of Jesus in story, but those stories just simply being stories for us, we have walked away from the group, walked away from Jerusalem. I know that that is a story like myself that I have had, and I've had other people tell me similar stories, that at one point in their life they realized that the story that they had heard of the risen Jesus was to them just a story and not a truth and a reality that they had experienced for themselves. See, these two disciples have all the information that they need. All the information is available to them. They had Jesus' teaching while he was with them. They had him telling them over and over again that he was going to die and rise again. Yet that didn't do it for them. They had the witness of the women who saw the tomb empty. That didn't do it. They had the proclamation of the angels saying he is risen, and it seems like that hasn't done it. Yet, at the same time, while they are in their despair, while they are grieving these things, Jesus does come to them. They are not indifferently walking away from Jerusalem, are they? They are discussing these things among themselves. These things are hard for them and they are difficult for them, yet Jesus sees their hearts, and in their despair, he comes to them. And I want to make 2 points about that specifically real quick. One, Jesus is nearer to us than we realize. Sometimes we are full of disappointments and heartache. Sometimes things haven't gone the way that we thought they were going to go. Yet Jesus is near, and he promises that he will be. And the other thing I want to say is that it's okay to verbalize these things out loud. It's okay to verbalize our heartaches and our disappointments, the things that we thought would go to better but hadn't yet. It's okay to verbalize them to one another. It's okay to verbalize them out loud to the Lord. He can handle it. In fact, it would be indifference not to verbalize them. They are not indifferently, again, walking away. They are walking away in sadness, which is something that Jesus can tolerate and can take. He is still the topic of their conversation. And it's not an accident that he shows up when they are speaking about him, just like it's not an accident that the angels appeared to Mary when they were, and the women, when they were seeking him out for themselves as well. That is going to be a thing in Luke, a common topic, a common theme, that Jesus appears, Jesus comes when people are attending to him, discussing him, seeking him out. He comes, he appears. But yet at the same time, he's not in a hurry to clear up their confusion. He is okay and fine with being unrecognized while he talks with them. I would expect him to come in and say, "Pop in. Don't worry. I'm alive. I'm here. You don't need to be worried. You don't need to be brokenhearted." And yet, he doesn't. In fact, he doesn't alleviate their disappointments, and he walks with them on the road away from Jerusalem. Now, I think that he wanted them to go back to Jerusalem. That's what they do in the end of the story. They go back once they realize who he is and that he's alive. And yet he walks with them away from Jerusalem, unrecognized. And I want to end this first section before our next song. I want to end this section with the encouragement that it's okay to speak to one another about our struggles and disappointments and our heartaches, but just don't expect Jesus to be in a rush to come in and clarify everything all at once. He reveals himself to us in his time. And it is just then that when he reveals himself to us that we learn how close he was to us all the time and how much he was caring for us even when we didn't recognize him. Let's go ahead and sing 524, I Know Whom I Have Believed. So the question is, what is the reason for his distance? And I want to offer some suggestions or some ideas on what the reason for his distance to them. Jesus wants his followers to freely obey him, even when they don't understand what is going on. Remember, these are his disciples. They had seen him. They had followed him. They were counted among them. And they had listened to him, believed in him. They had committed to him. But he shows loving, tender correction in their lack of understanding the scriptures, lack of understanding what he told them, but he does not hold their foolishness in understanding against them. He would have liked for them to understand, I'm sure, but he is patient with them. He is in some way seeing if they have learned anything from him, though, with their time with him. If you notice here, he acts as if he's going to go on ahead without them as they reach their destination, alone on the road. And he gives them another means by which to show their faith, show that they understand, show that they had been listening to him. Maybe the words that he had just spoken a few days before, that's recorded in John 13:20, were still ringing in their ears as they saw this stranger begin to walk away from them. When Jesus, in that passage, was speaking about Judas, he says that he is not speaking to everyone who is in earshot of him, but only those who are to obey him. And then he says, truly, truly, in John 13:20, truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. And I wonder, to them, this man being a stranger on the road, is this man fitting the bill for them? Someone who is sent by him, someone who has taken the time to encourage them with the words from the scriptures. He's a stranger who may be hungry, a stranger who would be walking the road alone at night. There are times when Jesus makes himself distant to us in order for us to show that we have been listening to him. It reminds me of the story of the Garden of Eden, how Adam and Eve walked with the Lord, walked with God in the Garden of Eden, and yet he gave them periods of time, apparently, where their eyes did not see him, where they believed him to not be around. If he didn't do so, how would they be freely able to choose whether to take from the tree or not, whether to obey him or not, while he's standing right there? And yet, when he's gone in the Garden of Eden, at least while they don't perceive him to be there, they trespass and they take the fruit. I think that very often Jesus is presented to us as a stranger. In fact, like his disciples, all we have to go on when we first encounter him is the stories that we are told of him. Like him, all we have is our heartaches and a stranger who is knocking at the door of our hearts. Becoming his disciple is a lot like inviting a stranger to sit at our table. And when he is invited in, Jesus naturally takes his place at the head of the table. When we invite him to stay, he will take his place at the head of the table because that is exactly where he belongs. And when he does, he will do and say things to us which remind us of the stories which are told of him. The language of him breaking the bread, for instance, in this passage, of taking it and blessing it and breaking it and passing it that is identical to the language of the institution of the Lord's Supper in Luke 22. Compare the two for yourself. He does the exact same actions. I would say here that it is the exception for someone to be really, truly aware of who Jesus is and see his strength and power and glory, and then to submit to him in obedience. I was having a discussion with a brother recently about how we need to take the Cornelius experience more seriously. The idea that people will sometimes be given insight and be given and show fruit of faith, and then it's okay to baptize them at that time. And I thought, that's true. I want to take that seriously. Sometimes people do show signs of the fruit of the Spirit, signs that the Spirit is working in their life, and fruits of faith in their life before they're baptized. But what I would hate to do is to take those examples and forget the fact that those fruits are not a requirement in order to be baptized. The typical conversion experience in the New Testament is someone who has heard just enough to put faith in a stranger named Jesus because of the stories we have heard of him, and then discovering his resurrection power after the fact. I like to call this idea the ironic surprise. It's an ironic surprise because what we find when we act in faith is exactly what we were told we would find, but we are still surprised to find it. A person can enter the waters of baptism with no previous experience of salvation and come out rejoicing, having been given the assurance after the fact that it was the right decision, whether in the act, immediately after, or even sometimes down the road. But suddenly, all the memory verses that we were taught, all the things our parents told us, the preacher told us, all the things that we parroted when we were younger, all the words that Jesus spoke become intimately personalized for us. And our memories in that way are also baptized. Our memories are baptized because they show us that he was always with us. Let's sing 528. On this last movement here of this sermon, I want to talk about how the story of Emmaus, the road to Emmaus, holds in it the pattern of Christian fellowship, and we see in it how it is that Jesus reveals himself to us. He reveals himself to us in the conditions set in the passage, when we gather in his name, when we open the scriptures to seek him, and when we come together to break the bread of life together, him at the head of our table. Yes, every Lord's Day has been given us to refocus, recommit, and reaffirm who he is. And this is the day that is called Easter, where we celebrate the real, bodily, true, miraculous resurrection of the Lord, in which we put our hope of salvation. We cannot allow ourselves to leave this room and go out into the world, into our jobs and our extended families and into our neighborhoods, and forget what it was that we came here to affirm. The call to assemble is for the purpose of arming and equipping us to go out and boldly live resurrected lives, so that on the day of the Lord, when we are all judged, we will not shrink back, but be found among the living. The road that began in heartache and despair ends in hope and energy and excitement. The story begins with 2 sheep going their own way and ends in restoration and reincorporation into the greater Christian fellowship. The story begins with confusion and ends in clarity, with Jesus being taken from them, and ends with Jesus being ever present to them, with them, and giving them the task of taking on themselves his ministry. So I ask in conclusion, is this your story? Have you encountered the resurrected Jesus? Taking a step in faith is making room for Jesus at the head of your table, to submit to him, believe him who you do not see, and he will give you everything you need to be convinced that he is resurrected. Let's stand and sing 346. 346.